Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sunrise Road podcast, a podcast where we have conversations that connect and weave hope into the fabric of our shared lives. My name is Melody Jones-Pointed.
And my name is Thomas Dummermuth. And today I'm very excited to have our friend Patty Forsberg with us. Some of you may have met Patty before. We had Patty here at our church at Eastridge Presbyterian Church have an Enneagram retreat with us, or a retreat on boundless compassion right before the pandemic, and boy, did that session land right then. Patty is a practicing teacher of centering prayer and welcoming prayer with contemplative outreach and biospiritual focusing with the Biospiritual Institute, spiritual director and retreat leader, and all around an exciting conversation partner to have here. Welcome, Patty. We're so glad that you're here with us today.
Well, we'll see. Thank you. Good to see you both. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Patty, we have been this Lenten season exploring we have been exploring the deadly sins, inspired by a book of Elizabeth Oldfield. The book is titled Fully Alive, and the subtitle is Tending to the Soul in Turbulent Times. And I thought it would be really interesting to talk to a spiritual director today, because I think that turbulent times is something that many of us experience. What do you think? First of all, do you see ourselves? How do you situate ourselves? Do you think we are going through turbulent times? In what ways? And in what ways? What role can spirituality play during this time?
That's kind of a big question.
I know it's a huge one.
Just a little light opener right there.
So do I find this a turbulent time? Is that part of your question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In where do you see the turbulence? I guess this might be a. Yeah.
I can approach that from a few different angles, because there's the outside turbulence, and then there's the inside turbulence, and definitely there's what people have named chaos in many of our institutions that we thought were pretty solid, and that tends to rock what we think is solid and center in ourselves as well. And you had a second half of your question. I'm not sure I answered that one, but
Well, I think we'll get to that. I'm sure. One thing that we have been talking about is the deadly sins, and that is of course a very ancient concept. And we have talked a little bit in an earlier episode about a little bit general understanding what sin could be or not, and how that is a helpful context. And Melody then had a conversation with some guests about the experience of wrath, and how that gets in our way in our living peacefully together. If I can just throw that at you, what other deadly sins do you see at play, and in what way can we? How can we respond to them?
Another big question, Thomas. Goodness. I don't know about naming the deadly sins, but I can speak to the response. Because I'm sure that I saw the table of contents for your book, and she's definitely got some covered there. And I don't know that my perspective would add anything to that, but in response, one of the things that I've found to be true is that what you place your attention on tends to grow. If you think about, well, both of you have plants in your background, right? Any plant that is watered in good soil and has sun will grow well. And what we feed ourselves with tends to matter. And so the response to the world, I have a good portion of my clients talk a lot about all of the dysregulation in their personal lives and in their own system. And one of the first things that I have started looking for is how are you feeding yourself? And not just your body. We know that if we put toxic elements into our physical bodies, our bodies won't feel very good. They won't function very well. And science tells us we probably won't live very long, or we're one of the lucky ones. But the rest of our being is the same way, our minds and our hearts. If we continue to feed ourselves with fear and worry by focusing on things that aggravate and escalate that, then we're probably going to experience a lot of that. But if we can allow ourselves and gift ourselves the space to find something different that is also true, then we might experience these times with a little more resilience.
It occurs to me that as we were sort of getting ready to go live, and we were talking about when you were last here with us in person, and we did the Enneagram, and we did the Boundless Compassion with Joyce Rupp, which I think both you and I had previous experiences with. And at the time, what I remember saying is that wanting to create spaces for us to be spiritually healthy, so that in the event, and then the event happened, and it felt like, kind of doing that, preparing the soil, talking about like how to be spiritually grounded. And so I think it's rather fortuitous that you're with us now, and not an accident that as we were talking about this podcast, who next might we have. And these 2 weeks have been kind of Thomas's weeks of, putting aside distractions and how do we bring ourselves to attention. And then this week of from anxiety to belovedness. And so forgive me for sort of fangirling here, but you're sort of the guru for me, like how do I find those things? Because I so want to be healthy, and we've talked a lot about like turning off social media, but then we put our spiritual practices on social media. This is on social media, so good for us. But like, what are some things that you like? How can we nourish? How can we feed ourselves with good things instead of constantly being distracted by the chaos outside of us and inside of us?
My first thought is we all know how to do that. Most of the spiritual, everybody's looking for a new spiritual practice as if it's going to be some kind of trick, kind of like going to the doctor and hoping that there's just a magic pill instead of like, I'd like to lose 50 pounds. Can you just give me a pill for that? Or I don't need to have surgery. I want that. So we tend to look at, I think, spiritual practices in that kind of, from that kind of place. But your being and your body and your heart knows what's good for it. And you have a sense of what feels good in you. so what occurs to me in that place are two things. First of all, we dismiss some things that the mind can't articulate. We live in a mental culture, where science validates things that are measurable and tends not to validate something that we can't measure. And we're definitely in that realm here. So to not dismiss things that we don't understand, I think is one step. But the other one is, it's really about valuing yourself enough to make those choices for yourself. And many of us have grown up in a culture where taking care of the other person seems to be more important than taking care of yourself. But there's a really good metaphor if you've ever been on an airplane, and the flight attendant will show you how to use the oxygen mask. And what do they tell you to do first? Even if you have a small child next to you, if you're not getting oxygen, you cannot help that next person. And so I think if we remember that we are valuable, and if we treat ourselves in such a way, those are the two. And I think that we have a lot of excuses for doing that, and they're all valid. Some of them are distractions. Some of them are yeses that we've said yes to, for really, really good reasons. But we have to put ourselves on that list too. I don't know what that feels like to you, but that's what comes to mind here.
Truth bomb there, Patty. Yeah, I mean, we know how to do that. We also know why we may not do that. But this week I was talking about this week our spiritual practices prompts. Some of them are like, put reminder on your mirrors, or affirmation, or those kind of things. Why does that not come natural to us? Why I know that self-care is important, and I get that metaphor, but I get it here. The face mask. When I'm living it, practice it, try it, mark out the time I feel guilty, selfish, frivolous. Yeah, how do I follow the doctor's orders?
What comes to mind as you're saying that are two things. Thomas Keating talks about, and that's where you'll find contemplative outreach, his programs for happiness. And they all come in three different categories. I won't remember them all right now, but our need for security, attachment, safety, all of those types of things. And they're not disconnected from attachment theory, where you look at a little person that is not perfectly cared for, and that would include every one of us. And when we don't have perfect attachment, we look for acceptance instead, and we allow acceptance to be our food, which is not as nutritious to our being as a secure attachment. And that acceptance comes in many, many ways. And that's where the Enneagram starts hitting us, right? We use those ways of being. You look at someone that is really good at achieving, that becomes how they make their way in the world. So to let go of that way of being, that attachment to my program for happiness, I have to walk through a lot of stuff to be able to release that. And so you're starting to hit some of those survival skills, defense mechanisms that kind of get in the way of, I could take, like someone that's a 2 on the Enneagram, we call them helpers, right? They look to someone else's needs 100 times before they look to their own. That's their way of being in the world. That's how they've learned to be connected and see their own value. Just for a couple examples.
I think when you were talking about taking care of yourself, and then Thomas, in that question, the question that bubbles up for me is, I don't necessarily trust, one, that I do know what's best for me. So like, how do I trust, like, where is that information gonna come from, especially, if I'm craving junk food all the time. How do I, how do I figure out what is right for me, for my spirit? So how do I know and listen to what that is, and then also, how do I trust that I can do it? Because a lot of times when I think about spiritual disciplines, and some of the ones, full disclosure, I have not practiced all of these spiritual disciplines, and I think that's why we put so many, there's like one a day during the weekday, and some of them are like writing or journaling, and you know what, like that's just not me. Like, so I hold on to the centering prayer, I meditate, I do yoga, I go for a run, I tend to do things that are more physically connected. Does that mean I'm afraid of writing? Am I avoiding writing? Like, what might happen if I start writing? Might I never end? Like, is it just going to be like this flood of things coming in? Like, how do I trust? How do I know what I need? How do I trust myself to know what I need?
Letting yourself trust what you need. There's nothing wrong with a practice that feels good to you. The spiritual practice does not have more value if it's hard.
Okay. So for the person who, we had a wonderful session led by one of our members and leaders in our congregation on centering prayer. And we had a lot of people who had not tried centering prayer before. And maybe they left and thought, well, that's really interesting, but that's not for me.
Yeah.
Or for the people who, find it hard, really difficult to look in the mirror and say, I am God's beloved.
Yeah.
Like, if that practice isn't your jam, that's okay.
That's okay. Absolutely. That's okay. Absolutely. Let yourself be drawn to it. I think that magnetic kind of desire quality is worth listening to.
I'm pulling down a Post-it that I have in front of me. Consider the possibility that you might do that, you are not doing it wrong. With that, there's nothing wrong with the practice that works for me. I think that is that allow yourself that this might actually be for me. I think that is a very encouraging thing.
And what if you're doing yoga and you fall over?
Then you do chair yoga.
Wrong.
Then you stay on the floor, or
there's only doing it.
I think what's more valuable there is sometimes we use a spiritual practice as its own distraction, particularly when things get like when we're going through a rough time. My advice to people a lot is stick with the practice that you're in and just be faithful to it and trust it. Because a lot of times our discomfort will lead us to hop around to different things and in a way of trying to avoid the discomfort. But if you just trust your centering prayer when you don't want to do it that day, if that's the practice that you've chosen, and just stick with it and trust that it's feeding you, whether you can feel that it's effective or not, kind of doesn't matter. And that's hard. Mm-hmm.
that that impulse to jump to the next thing, right? You were already you already hinted at that in the sense of you go to the doctor and hope to get a different answer than last time. Mm, yeah, that is very real. That is very real. It reminds me in when the fathers, one of the desert father Evagrius Ponticus talks about Acedia and talks about that impulse to jump away from our prayer time or whatever. There's this he was talking to a student who says sometimes I can pray, and then he said, well, if you can't pray with your own words, then use words that someone gives you. And if you can't use those words, then pray with your body. And if you can't pray with your body, then keep at least the space open in that time. And that's kind of what I hear you saying is like kind of whether it's working right now, don't step back. It's like, ooh, should I move on to the next thing? But to hold that space for more than the moment. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, when we're like talking about a spiritual practice, we have to trust the impulse that that drew us to it, and I think it's completely okay to do one that sounds fun to you or that you're curious about, rather than, I mean, you can choose the one that looks the worst to you and learn from that, I suppose, but but then stick with, like with centering prayer, I tell people, you don't have to do half an hour a day, do 5 minutes a day, but stick with it, for a month and let it show you, because you're trusting not only yourself and the divine, but the practice that, a practice that's been around for a while. And so you're trusting something that's larger than you, and that's the practice itself.
Yeah, it occurs to me, when we talk about centering prayer, and we had the group centering prayer here, and I do think that everybody who was there entered into a centering prayer, and for me, it felt much like being washed or cleansed or reset or ready to start again. For me, often it's about finding a practice that somebody else is leading. And maybe that takes away some of the intimidation of it. I'm, again, an Enneagram 8. So for me, it's the practice of not being in control, not being in charge, not, just like going in and, yes, I can do these things on my own. But when somebody else is making the decisions for me, it just feels like it's so great.
Well, you're a leader,
you can trust them.
So where, like, if that is somebody's came to contemplative prayer here, or they're like, oh, I want to get more into spiritual disciplines, more into spiritual practices, like where can you find those, where there's groups here in town? We've talked about maybe starting a weekly Lectio Divina here, which is so great because it's not about the person leading it or the education or expertise of anybody. It's just about what do you hear. So, what are some other places that you might be aware of that we're not, of places you can go on a regular basis to have somebody else lead you and guide you through some of these spiritual practices?
There's so many.
It's so good to hear. I don't think we know that. I don't think, maybe we don't talk about that enough.
Wow. Yeah. Oh, there's so many. Because of the internet and Zoom, we not only have the capacity to reach not only what's in our personal library, but like books that you both have behind you, right? There's the internet is a plethora of both things that are extremely valuable, and of course we know things that are less valuable. So you do have to trust yourself a little bit. But gosh, we could maybe procure a list of some reliable resources to let people get started with. There's one called, I don't even want to start listing because the expanse is really, really wide. But there's, and it's also about preference. Do you want to be in person with someone that is in your community, or do you mind if your community is global? And there are advantages to both of those.
But there are resources out there. So if somebody is listening and they want,
absolutely,
maybe send them your way.
Yeah, like just like one off the top of my head, contemplative outreach is one, and they do have some centering circles that are online. I think they call them meditation chapels, but they have other events throughout the year. Cynthia Bourgeau's community is called Wisdom Waypoints, and there are multiple entry points there. They have like just a morning half an hour centering prayer with a reading. They have, she's written quite a bit from different aspects, including centering prayer and wisdom, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, a few things. And so there are book study groups around those. And I offer a group spiritual direction practice through them. So there's lots of, those are just two. And of course, we know Contemplate Lincoln, there's an access point there too. Yeah.
Excellent. I do want to, I listened up when you said earlier something about that we live in a mental time. And I know I gave you this huge question to start off for the turbulent times. I am wondering, with what I see and feel happening with fake news and lies becoming reality and all this kind of things, with the question of the scientific method, that I wonder if that mental time is coming to an end. And where do you see us going? And how do we navigate that?
Well, luckily, you don't have to lean on just my vision for that, but it does feel true to me. There are people that see, Joanna Macy calls it a great turning. There are others, Ken Wilber, Gene Gebser, Paul Smith wrote Integral Christianity. Cynthia Bourgeau talks about this as well. But there's something that is called integral theory, and we have gone through evolutions of consciousness from magic to mythic to mental. And the theory is that the mental consciousness has reached its peak and is starting to break down. And when the breakdown starts to happen, the mental consciousness created institutions and the Industrial Revolution and scientific method, but that consciousness cannot solve its own problems. And so what these people have seen next is the integration of all three consciousnesses working together. And so you see people starting to talk about lots of different truths that have almost been filtered through humanity and are coming back up in the more purity form of their essence. The wisdom of the body is only one example there, that the body holds its own truth and has a knowing. And so when you talk about like the questioning of what's true and what's not true in culture, your body does have a sense of what's true. Like particularly if you understand where your no is, like if you're in a situation and your whole body just says no, like I'm not walking into that place, or I can't say yes to that, that's a truth in your body. And that is what will guide us forward, that kind of knowing in the body and trusting this so it's an authority that we carry. And so many teachers have said, what you desire is already within you. This is part of the road to that. I think so. Looking for that resource outside is not, it's a generational habit that we've had for a few generations, but it's not working anymore.
So I love your response, because I will tell you that this is a conversation actually that Thomas and I have been having for a while. And I will admit to some anxiety over the lack of reason and rational thinking that I associate with, I'm a historian, and so I don't want to go back to the Salem witch trials and to like I don't want to go back to that. I see a resurgence of spirituality. I read a headline. I haven't really read the news in a while, but I read a headline the other day. I think it was the Pew Research has found that the decline of religion in America has slowed. And so we're no longer in a rapid decline. That doesn't necessarily mean that the churches aren't still declining. But as these things open up, I guess the question I'm excited by your response, because it gives me hope that we can integrate these. Because I think my fear is that in losing the emphasis on reason, that it's just gone. But what you're saying is, no, like, how do we create these things together? How do we incorporate all of these things into, is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know that we have to figure it out. I think we allow it.
Okay.
So there were a number of years where I set the Bible down completely. It had come to me perhaps in what I would say a twisted form, and I just set it down. And what happened over a number of years is it started coming back. Pieces started coming back. And in the way that, Jesus talked about, we talk about how Jesus taught in parables, and he taught to multiple levels of where people were at. And what happens when you set something down and it comes back in its pure form is that the essence of some of those teachings became clear through the filter of that time and allowing the experience of all of me. So one of the ways that we can integrate it in our lives is just by allowing your body to be an intelligence, to allow your heart, your emotional capacity to be an intelligence, as well as your mental intelligence, and honoring all three and living out of all three. And so the mind doesn't get to run the show all the time. Sometimes it sits in the back seat and we listen to hear, because what will happen is we'll hear a no here, but the mind says, I don't see any danger. You're not making any sense. We're going to go ahead with whatever situation. But your whole body might be saying, I'm exhausted. I can't go to that thing tonight. But you've got it on your calendar and you've got an obligation because that's who you are. And you already said yes. And so then you get sick the next day. So we're denying that kind of intelligence. But there's many people over a number of decades, at least that I know of, have been speaking about how this reintegration will come back. And they don't come back in the Salem witch trials kind of form, but they do come back in, for I think, their essence, in a lot more clarity. Because the mind is a beautiful tool. It's just not the only tool.
I want to believe that.
Thomas is thinking. Thomas is
I want to
clearly
believe
thinking.
that. Well, I guess where I'm at is that the religious voices that I hear getting loudness
Mhm.
are not those voices. They are shrill, they are cruel, they are fear-driven,
Mhm.
and they're everywhere. And they seem to be on the up and up. So I guess what I hear you saying, trusting that they will burn themselves out,
Hmm.
is the invitation, or shut them out and focus on um, what's here.
Yeah, that's a tough question, isn't it?
Mhm.
That energy to me feels like somebody holding on by their fingernails. Feels like a toddler having a temper tantrum sometimes, right? And what I come back to is two things. I can't fix them, but I can take care of me. And then only from that place can I be effective in my sphere of influence. And then what is my sphere of influence? You know, I don't have a stage. Well, in the moment, I kind of do, but that's unusual. But what's in my sphere of influence? And that's, I think, one reason why people are talking so much about the strength of community these days, because that's where we have a God of relationship. And those relationships and those connections are really where our power is. And that feels real to me. So if I can be in good relationship with myself, then that will extend.
Yeah, my a few years ago, again during the pandemic, and we're not supposed to mention that because studies have shown that people tune out when we even talk about it, which is
Interesting.
that's fascinating. But when the mayor's prayer breakfast had one of my colleagues and classmates from seminary, his name is Gregory Ellison III, and he he's written several books. One of them is Fearless Dialogue, which is I think the book that he was talking about with Parker Palmer that day. It was all on Zoom, but he writes two stories that I just think are lovely. One is that as he's gone out, and he's a fabulous speaker, but as he's gone out, he's gotten into the habit of always greeting everybody there and saying, I've been excited to see you today. I've been looking forward to see you today, so that everybody knows that he is prepared to be in this space, in this presence with these individual people. And I just think that's a lovely story. But then the other thing is he talks about as he was growing up, and he asked his grandmother, how he could change the world, or like they were talking about, like he just felt like he didn't have a lot of influence, and she said something like, pay attention to the 3 feet in front of you. I can't change the world. And he's African American, growing up in the Atlanta area, at a time when there change was needed, and it still is all of our country. But that 3 feet, and we do keep talking about that here because it does feel like so much time we spent were powerless. And I loved last week, Thomas mentioned this in his service, that sometimes the acedia or the sloth is because we are so overwhelmed that we can't save the world, and so we just do nothing.
Yeah.
So what I hear you saying is it's okay in those times to think, I can stay grounded. I can stay centered and mind the 3 feet around me, and that will be enough.
My husband has a Post-it note here, which is barely readable because of his handwriting, but it says, nobody has to do everything, which is what we feel if everyone does something. And it doesn't mean that you have to change what's on the news. but you can take care of yourself and you can take care of the one next to you,
Yeah.
or at least care for. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe that is the act of resistance. You know, maybe that
Mm-hmm.
is the act of protest. And oh gosh, Thomas, where is that in Elizabeth Oldfield as well, that, you know, being a community is an act of resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Caring for each other is an act of resistance to a culture and a way of being that says, I am what I do.
Well, if you look at the word resistance and it feels like the world outside is violence, aggressive, and chaos,
Mm-hmm.
kindness is a resistance towards just those two energies.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it that way, kindness, being kind in the face, in the midst of something that does not feel kind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Here's a confession moment.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I feel like the kind of kind that I'm offering is not the kind of kindness that is sought. How's that?
Whatever kindness you have to offer is okay.
Thank you, Patty. I needed that. I needed that today.
Mm. You're welcome.
I would love to go for another hour, but we've been talking already for quite a bit, Patty.
Have we?
I'm so appreciative of all the things that you share with us, and how you share it with us. I think there's something about that. I had a spiritual discipline prompt yesterday to think of what people had an impact on me. And I kept thinking of, it's not just what they said, but how they said it, or how they were present, with what, I don't know, energy, or much more than the actual words. And that in itself, I think, is a practice.
Yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It's always lovely to be in your presence, Patty. And thank you so much for what you do and who you are and how you are in our community. We're better for your presence and for your kindness,
Kind of you.
for your loving kindness for all of us.
I do want to highlight that you teach, you offer classes, you see clients one-on-one, or you booked out, or
I don't know what booked out means. No, I do small groups and I do individuals. Yeah.
you make sure to put your information in the podcast show notes. I think that's the word that the kids use these days. That people can find you and connect with you and your work.
And as we close, I'll just remind an invitation to not dismiss those small things, because maybe they're not small.
Thank you so much. I want to, as we close, also give a shout out to, I think we call him our producer, the man behind the magic.
Yes, that's what the kids say these days.
The great wizard, the kids, because we're Thomas and I are facing big birthdays this year, so we're trying to do what kids do. Would really like to thank Vince Rule, who is our producer, and Eastridge Presbyterian Church for making this possible, and Patty for being our guest, and always for my colleague Thomas, who thanks for all the magic and making it all happen today.
Right.
And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you all.
Good to be with you.